Hello, good evening, everyone. Hi, everybody. Good evening. We'll get started. Thank you very much for attending tonight. This, as you know, is public meeting number 2 for the Green Lane Master Plan. This is a work in progress. We've got a long way to go still, but we're going to give you a lot of information tonight about where the plan is and where we're going. Our next meeting is in December. You have a schedule that has that on there. Also, first of all, I should introduce myself. My name is Peter Simone. I'm with a firm called Simone Collins, and with me tonight is Sarah Leeper and Emma Haley. We're all landscape architects, part of the team that the county retained to work with you on the master plan. We are also broadcasting this on the web, and the meeting's being recorded. And we have about, 10 people online, 8 people online, so that's great. So we'll get right to the presentation and go from there. We're going to take about an hour to do the presentation and leave the second hour for questions and comments. I should mention also, this presentation will be up on the county website in a few days. Give us till next week. So we're going to hit you with a lot of information. It's going to be hard to absorb all of it tonight. We'll do the best we can to be clear. Here's our agenda. I won't read this. This is on your handout. So we're going to go through a number of items. Again, this is our team. In addition to Simone Collins, we have an environmental firm called Resource Environmental Solutions. They're ecologists and biologists. We have architects Seiler and Drury out of Norristown, and Pat Stacio, who's our certified park and recreational professional. This is our county steering committee. I know Ellen and Patty from this group are online tonight. Joe Seltzer's here, and Josh Anaskevich, right? Did I get it close? He's here. I never get that name right. So this is our county working group. And then you can't read this, but this is on your handout. These are the many folks who are on our steering committee, and we meet with them between these public meetings. And they give us a lot of great information and guidance. So the park history, you may remember, if you were at the first meeting. Who was at the first meeting? Just so get a feel. Okay, maybe half, a little bit more. Great. The park started back in 1929. It was up at Perkiomen Valley Park, and construction was got going in 54, and in 59. Philadelphia Suburban Water Company opened Green Lane Reservoir, and then Green Lane Reservoir Park was established early in the 80s. And then the two parks were combined in 1983, or actually the two parks were merged in 1998. So this is Montgomery County's largest county park. And as you know, it's quite beautiful. And our job is to really make a good park even better, hopefully, as we move into the future. This was a plan that somebody gave us from the 30s. It's not really legible. One of the early plans that was done for the park. And then, of course, there was a master plan done in the year 2000. That was done by the county. Jean Akers, who's on our committee, she was part of that master plan. If you look at it, we're going to post this year 2000 master plan on the on the county website next week. So you can look at it also. And we'll mention that in a few minutes. Just some sort of interesting older photos. We think these are from the late 50s, early 60s. This is the Green Lane, Deep Creek area on the left. And you can see, a lot of new trees have grown in 50 or 60 years. So this is right after the dam and reservoirs were constructed, the old beach area. So just really the lodge and the area around Deep Creek, the old snack shack, etc. So we just put these in here because it's always nice to see the things that are the same and the things that have changed. One of the things this reminds us of is the landscape is a very dynamic environment. So just as the park is different than it was today, 50 years ago, 50 years from now, it's going to be different too. So that landscape is always changing and always very dynamic. So in terms of the process, just reminding all of us that this is a master plan. And our process with a master plan is that we do a site analysis, collect data, and you're going to see some of that analysis today and some of the data we've collected. We're developing a site program with your help and developing preliminary concepts. Tonight, we're going to present some of those preliminary concepts to our meeting. We can't show you everything, but we're going to hit the high points, we think. And then in December, we're going to present to you a draft plan. That'll be on the website. There'll be a 2-month review period for you to look at it and comment on it. We'll get those comments, and we're going to come back with an approved master plan. And I'm trying to remember the date, March, I think, February, March. March, we'll have a final plan. So still got many months to go here. And once that plan is done, then the county will secure funding, go through design and engineering, and do construction, probably in phases for some of the improvements that are recommended here. And you'll get a sense of that tonight. This is our schedule, so you can see we're about halfway through our calendar schedule. And again, our next public meeting is December 6th, and that's going to be at it's going to be at Green Lane Borough, and was it Fire Hall?
Green Lane Fire Hall.
The Green Lane Fire Hall, thanks. And then our last public meeting is going to be back here on March 20th. So as you can see, we have a long way to go still, and still looking for comments. So with that, I'm going to turn this over to Emma, and she's going to take you through some of the public input we've gotten so far.
So I'm just going to briefly go over the brainstorming session that we had during public meeting number 1.
Can't hear you.
Okay. Can everyone hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Thank you. So just as a brief overview of that brainstorming session, we hit on, or we went over the goals, the facts, the concepts, and partners that you would like to see in the master plan and what is also current in the park. We had over 100 participants within that meeting, so we were able to generate a lot of great feedback for all of those categories. And with all that feedback, we started to type it all out and categorize it into these green sections because a lot of those comments that you have were overlapping. So first, looking at a lot of you guys were talking about volunteers, and a discussion was that you want better advertisement for volunteer opportunities. Another common theme was facilities, and a lot of that was mentioned about nature centers as well as smaller recreation facilities like maybe a kayak rest stop as well as a larger ice rink or more multi-use play fields. Also another topic talked about was trails. So people mentioning about pedestrian access for local municipalities as well as more signage and wayfinding. Another one was programs. So talking about maybe having an app or having more community events within the park. And ecology, nature, cultural resources also being talked about. So thinking about how we can conserve a lot of Green Lane Park or protect it, and also looking at preserving historic sites. So within these next couple of slides, we're going to take a glimpse at just some of the results that we got off of the Survey Monkey. We did get over 1,000 responses so far, which is really great feedback, and we want to keep seeing that coming in. It does end in November or end in October, so if you haven't taken the survey yet, please do. So first, one of the first questions on the survey is, are you a resident of Montgomery County? And 3/4 of the respondents responded yes, but that 24% that answered no ended up being within these 5 counties, with Chester County being, or 6 counties, with Chester County being the most prevalent. And we think it's because of those connecting routes into the park. Also, one of our questions is, or the map over to the right is something that we had on the survey as the 8 key destinations that we identified within the park. And we wanted to see where you guys use the park the most because it's such an expansive land. And most of you responded the main area or the green lane area, but that's not to disregard any of these. Again, this is not a vote. This is just for us to understand how you're using the park and how maybe we can start to apply that data into our master plan. Also, another question that we thought was really interesting was if you guys felt that there was enough adequate parking, and most of, or all of you, or most of you said yes. Also looking at what trails you guys use the most, and those top three is the Blue Trail, Red Trail, and Perkiomen Trail. Again, not disregarding any of these, but maybe they're a little bit lower because we need more access to them, or maybe they're a little bit more difficult or not as maintained. Also, which difficulty level would you like to see more of in the park? And a lot of you guys said more moderate trails. And second, looking at more difficult trails. But then not too far from difficult trails, everyone was thinking about using or thinking that the existing trails provided enough variety, which I thought was really interesting. But again, since ADA is last or lowest on the chart, it's not being disregarded. If we're putting in new trails, we always want to count for ADA accessibility. Also asking you guys to select the ecologically driven facilities that you'd like to see in the park. And the top three were all stormwater based, or these larger swaths that you'd like to see more ecology brought to within the park. And that's like stormwater BMPs, environmental interpretation. So looking at adding wetlands, watershed plans, nature studying and bird watching, and also eco restoration planting. So like large wildflower meadows. And then also looking at selecting three of the priorities that you feel Green Lane Park should focus on. And the top one being new trails. And then not too far behind it is protection of important and sensitive habitats, stewardship, as well as additional land conservation. And then this was one of the last questions on the survey, and it's having you guys rank the recreational experience you want to see from Green Lane Park. And mainly the comments were to use the park as for walking, jogging, or bicycling, and then also a place for you guys to enjoy the outdoors. So another survey, or not survey, but public participation tool that we had as part of the QR code was this wiki map. And we've only had 29 responses so far. So if you haven't used this, it's a really great tool. It's like more of a interactive Google site. So you're using all of these points that you see in the legend to identify on the map. And it's a really great tool for us to look at what you guys use most in the park and what you'd like to see improved within the park. So just to go through a few of those comments that people have added so far, is somebody's commenting that they'd like to see a new bike trail extended from the Orange Trail. Also looking at a new pedestrian trail. This person was thinking big. They wanted to see it all the way across or around the reservoir. And then also looking at proposed activities and amenities throughout the park. Somebody mentioned like mowing a piece of this part of the park. Looking at this part as an astronomy area that they want more formalized. And then this commenter mentioned that this part is a really peaceful part of the trail and they'd like to see more benches and more interactive signage talking about mindfulness and meditation. We also, over the summer, went through a series of key agency interviews. We've completed 17 so far, and we're looking to have another one with Aqua early in October. I'm not going to go through every single one that we talked to, but again, this PowerPoint will be up online for you guys to look at. But a lot of it was great feedback, and a lot of the insight that they provided was overlapping, which I thought was really interesting. So Pete's going to go through that in a little bit, but there's a lot of common themes and the topics that we want to start covering within this master plan that they've brought to our attention. Back up.
Thanks. And As Emma said, if you haven't taken the survey or the wiki mapping, QR code on your handout. And please give this to your friends too. The more information we get, the better. So I mentioned in 2000, a master plan was done for the park. And either through my lack of work or just I was too busy, I hadn't really looked at that 2000 master plan until recently, till we sort of get into the plan. And maybe not to my surprise, there were some common themes from 2000 to 2023 that still need to be addressed. If you look at the 2000 plan, a lot of the physical things that were recommended in that master plan have been accomplished. For example, the amphitheater was a recommended facility back in 2000. That's been built, very successful. So you can see a lot of those. And the mission statement back then was to create the crown jewel of Montgomery County, to protect the natural resources and to serve as a premier outdoor recreation facility serving people of all ages, interests and abilities in the outdoors. And so how do we update this mission statement to reflect our environmental and recreational values today? Because in the face of a lot of things that have been happening, I would suggest that those values have changed a little bit. So we'll work with you and suggest maybe a tweaked mission statement here. If you have some suggestions, please send them in to us. Our contact information is on that handout. I'd love to get an email, or if you want to talk to us, give us a jingle on the phone. And some of the recommendations from 2000 was establish a framework for stewardship. This was the first one on the list. It's the first one on our list still. Stewardship, we believe, is the most important thing still today for Green Lane Park. Develop natural resource management program closely tied to stewardship. Make improvements to existing facilities. Add new park features, and I mentioned many of those were added. Expand the role of the Nature Center. Back in 2000, the existing Nature Center was very strong due to some budget cuts. Staff was reduced, and then it fell into disrepair, and I guess there was a fire. So you'll see one of the things we're suggesting is to revisit the idea of a nature center. That's been suggested by a lot of folks that we've talked to. Improve visitor services and foster partnerships. Partnerships are critical. And we saw at the first public meeting, we had, as Emma mentioned, a lot of people are willing to volunteer, but there's not a great system set up right now. That's a big job to organize volunteers. So we'll have some suggestions for that. So towards eventual final recommendations, we've started to develop some guiding principles, and I'm just going to walk you through them very quickly. I'm not going to be able to get to a lot of detail, but the first one, we believe, we boil this down to 5 categories. The first one is stewardship, and we think that is the priority. Because if you don't protect the resources and the land and the water, you don't have recreation. You don't have a place to come in and enjoy. And we all take stewardship for granted, and we shouldn't. You know, there's a tradition in this part of the United States with the Lenape Indians who managed very aggressively natural lands. If you read about the Lenape, management of natural lands is hundreds, if not thousands of years old. And the way they did it was fascinating. We're starting to rediscover a little bit of what they did. And what they did was work with the land. So stewardship is key. The partnerships are key. We have agencies, we have businesses, nonprofits, local governments, and volunteers. They're all important partners for stewardship. And we want to think about stewardship long term. Our observation is because resources are stretched and personnel is stretched, a lot of times day-to-day things take the precedence, and the county park system is not always thinking about long-term stewardship. And that's the whole point of this park and why it's so great, is to protect those resources. And then the other thing about stewardship is acquisition, conservation, or enhancement of grounds beyond the park. The county doesn't have to go crazy and acquire hundreds of acres, but there could be conservation easements on nearby parcels, and there are other means where the resources that aren't owned by Aqua or the county can be protected, so the park's resources are protected. And it'll probably be eventually through a combination of methods. Organization and policy. Develop a long-term vision for policy. Coordinate volunteers. One of the things we're going to suggest is maybe there should be a volunteer coordinator, whether it's just for Green Lane or maybe county park-wide system as a whole. That could be a paid position with the county. It could be a vendor or an organization who's hired to organize volunteers, because a lot of you are out there wanting to do stuff, but there's no organization to really corral a lot of people to do that. Information dissemination is very important. And information to the general public, but also among the agencies. We talked to emergency responders from the county and the state police and the rangers. It might be great to get these folks together once a year to have like a summit on safety and things like that. And there are simple things that we need to make time to do, which will improve that whole organizational structure. And then other protections beyond the park boundaries with municipal ordinances, both with riparian buffers, with steep slopes, with those types of things, and also lighting ordinances. We heard some really energized astronomers from the Delaware County Astronomy Group, and dark skies, maintaining dark skies around the park is very important for nighttime viewing. It's also important for wildlife, because as you know, birds and other wildlife get confused when there's too much light in the area. So those are things that can be done on a municipal level. Maintenance and management, again, management for tomorrow. Systematize some of the things that are done with databases. Take advantage of the great GIS system that the county has. Think about sustainable practices for a changing climate. We're getting more intense storms. We're getting greater temperature fluctuations. Different types of species are doing differently in this area because it's getting warmer. Plan for that now. I mentioned agency first responder coordination and continuing education for staff. Management of natural lands is a sophisticated, complex process, and you can't expect people to know how to do it unless they're trained in it. So that's we think, a very important initiative that not only helps the park, but it builds a great employee system for the folks who work and maintain these grounds. We heard a lot at the first meeting about environmental education programs. I think there's a great need for that. And what you're really doing when you do environmental education, you're creating the future stewards. If we're going to convince the new county commissioners to think about more resources for this park and maybe other county parks, they need to hear from their constituents. They're not going to do it unless they hear from you. And we need to continue that in the future. We need to educate kids about how important the environment is. So environmental education is critically important, not only for everyone's growth, but for the maintenance and stewardship of facilities like Green Lane Park. Nurture a park identity that's focused on the environment. Maybe this should be called Green Lane Preserve or Green Lane Environmental Preserve. Gives a whole different flavor to what this place is about. Certainly it's for recreation. What's the main focus? We would suggest it's the environment. So maybe consider some kind of a subtle name change there that maybe focuses on protection of resources. Partnering with educational institutions. I know there's some work that already goes on with the area high schools. How do we bring in some of the area colleges and things like that? And also in terms of education, remember cultural and environmental history. I mentioned the Lenapes, which is the first group that maintained natural lands, and there's a lot of history with the region. And then the last thing, and we're going to suggest this is the least important, but it still has a place, are site improvements. Trail connections and circulation enhancement. You're going to see some ideas about that. Modest recreational facility improvements. Most of what you've got is pretty well used. It's light. We don't see huge projects, really more subtle projects in terms of physical improvements. The biggest one probably would be the visitor center, and that's, I guess, is a decade away if everything goes really well, but that's important too. And maintenance facility enhancements. You got to give the people who maintain these facilities the tools and the facilities they need to do a great job. And there's some needs there. So that is a real quick overview of how we think we're going to structure the report, some of the recommendations. Certainly, as we post this, give us your comments. Obviously, the report's going to get into a lot more detail, than I'm able to do in a few minutes tonight. So with that, I'm going to pass off to Sarah. She's going to take you through initial concepts, and then when we finish that, we'll get into some discussion.
Great. Everyone hear me okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to kind of take you through the park. This is an overview of all the areas that we've kind of visited throughout the park. Just to orient everyone quickly, down here is the Deep Creek Orange Trail area. You have Night Lake, Deep Creek, and then the lower reservoir working all the way up. Walt day use areas in here, and then you have the bird sanctuary here. So we're going to kind of visit different parts of the park and start to explore some of the initial concepts that we've developed. First, we are just going to kind of go through some of the data collection we've done to date. So RES has been out on the site multiple times throughout last spring and through the summer and into the fall, looking for not only plant species, but also kind of looking at what birds are going through the area. Also kind of trying to understand some of the wet reptile and amphibian habitat in the area. But what they've done is they started to develop a system of management units. So because we are dealing with large reservoirs, a lot of the units do kind of lay out along the reservoirs. So we kind of have, 6 units, 2 in the upper reservoir area, northwest, northeast, 2 in the lower reservoir, southwest, southeast, and then we have our Green Lake Park management unit and then our Deep Creek management unit. And you kind of see each management unit kind of has a current use that's taking place in that unit as well. So we do kind of have recreation spread throughout these units. And we kind of want to take away to kind of use these management units to help target recommendations. So each management unit kind of has unique habitat and plant species that are going on there. So there'll be very targeted recommendations within those units. And that will help the county kind of set priorities for kind of stewardship and restoration. And then we also kind of see, as we said, like each unit kind of has some sort of recreation happening in it, but kind of starting to tie that recreational use to kind of the habitat and the theme of what's going on there and start to create identities in the park. If you go back and you think about where do people go in the park, they go to Green Lane and they go to Deep Creek because it's very recognizable and it's a destination. We want to start to kind of create a destination throughout the whole park to kind of get people to explore more within the park. So kind of looking at each of these management units, we're going to start kind of in the top at the northwest. And we like to start to envision this as the grasslands at Green Lane Park. So you do have the existing bird waterfowl sanctuary that focuses on water habitat. But on the other side of Church Road, there's really open fields that with some basic management of kind of removing hedgerows and reestablishing grassland bird habitat, we really have the potential to create a regional habitat landscape for grassland birds. So kind of looking at expanding on the birding opportunities up in that area. Moving over to the northeast, so this is where we have the Walt day use, really kind of building on the idea of recreation and water resources in that area, and kind of partnering with what Perkiomen watersheds are already running their kind of programs out of there, but really kind of developing a water resource education area up in this area. So we have our boating components, but then when we're looking at the landscape, really focusing on, we have some invasive Phragmites habitat. We have potentials for really great wetland areas kind of moving down into this area. So really focusing on enhancing water habitats in that part of the lake. If you ever have a chance to hike up in this area, there's a lot of great kind of little habitat forests that you move through. We also this is where we start to hit kind of the beginning of what we call the red cedar monoculture. So if you've been out along kind of this side of the lake, there's lots of dense red cedar forest. And that's a very early forest successional stage, but what's happening is they're stalling and they're so dense that we don't have mature hardwood forests coming up underneath them. So what we're kind of starting to look at are ways to come up with strategies to help move that successional habitat along. As we move into the lower reservoir, we have the southwest, which we kind of call this the lakeside forest. So this is where the Blue Trail goes through. So we have really steep, mature forest hillsides with all those primary streams coming down the hill right into the reservoir. So one of our main goals there is really focus on removing invasive from those stream corridors because that becomes vectors for invasive to come into the park, as well as stabilizing those stream corridors, so making sure we have safe stream crossings there. We also have identified a few areas there where we kind of have some invasive understories that are starting to dominate. So looking to strategically target those invasive areas as well. On the other side, the southeast side of the lake, we're calling this the Red Hill Successional Forest, right? So this is where you have that, you see that Red Hill geology kind of on that east side of the lake. And this is where we have kind of those old fields that are really dominated by the red cedar. So again, focusing on the idea of kind of kickstarting those landscapes so that you start to get back to mature hardwood forests kind of on those hillsides. So this is a landscape that's going to be in transition for the next 20 years as that succession starts to take place and we reestablish forest communities that will start as meadow and then slowly transition into forest. And then last, as we start to come down to Deep Creek in the Knight Lake area, looking at Green Lane, we really see this as a demonstration landscape kind of focused on water quality, right? So this is one of the highest recreational areas. You have a lot of picnicking going on there. You have the amphitheater. They're really looking at creating aesthetic restoration plannings that focus on kind of stormwater management, minimizing the amount of unnecessary turf. We understand that we need some mown areas for activities, but there might be areas where we could remove mown lawn. And really kind of have it act as a demonstration landscape so people kind of understand how to implement these things maybe on a smaller scale within their own communities. And then last, looking at Deep Creek. So this is our other type of geology. This is the diabase geology. So you kind of, when you think about Deep Creek, you think about all the boulders along the roadside and kind of when you get back into the woods, there's a lot of big boulders. But we have a really mature hardwood forest here. I was just talking to Randy before this, they did a BioBlitz back in 2017 here where they went through and found as many species as they could. This is a natural heritage area for habitat as well that's been identified by the state. So there's a lot of good things going on back in that area. So, really here we're focusing on just, maybe improving the Deep Creek riparian zone. And then, at the edges of this, we have kind of working landscapes, agricultural lands, and some of them are within the park. And we'll kind of talk about ways that we could start to look at how those working fields can also be habitat for wildlife. So we'll talk about that a little bit when we get to Deep Creek Barn. So we're going to go through each of the concepts. I know some of you were looking at the boards before the meeting. We are going to start at Deep Creek and Green Lane, and then we're going to work our way back up to the bird sanctuary and end there. So looking at Deep Creek, again, we're going to kind of zoom into each of these, but just to orient you, we're at the southernmost part of the park. We have Deep Creek Road kind of runs up the west side of Deep Creek Lake. We have Green Lane Road cuts across the top of this area. And then off to the edge is Gravel Pike or Route 29 on the other side of the Perkiomen Creek. We do have a few trails going through here. You have access to the Orange Trail. The Perkiomen comes from the south and kind of wraps around up along Green Lane Road. And then we also have the Blue Trail kind of originates from the Perkiomen Trail and comes up to the equestrian campgrounds. So first, we're going to kind of look at the Deep Creek Road area. We have a couple of recommendations. One of the things we heard a lot about was kind of traffic along Deep Creek Road. So we wanted to look at ways that we can kind of slow people down and kind of identify that they're in the park. So the first thing is kind of really at number 1 here, as you kind of hit the park property formal, kind of having some sort of signage, maybe some historic piers on either side of the road that kind of reference some of the piers that we've seen throughout the park as an identifier that you're entering into the park. We are kind of looking at a big idea of a roundabout to help slow traffic down at this intersection. And also what that does is creates very defined pedestrian crossings. Currently, there are no pedestrian crossings between Deep Creek and kind of the park office area. And then looking at what people refer to as the Deep Creek parking lot at the trailhead of the Orange Trail, really kind of re-envisioning that parking lot. We are reducing some of the parking in there, but kind of creating more shade and opportunities to infiltrate stormwater within that parking area. And then this is where we're looking at the idea of a visitor center here. So it would be kind of located along the road. So you see it as you kind of drive by, but then kind of oriented. So you have this long view out across Deep Creek Lake from the visitor center. And then kind of, maybe a little plaza area to the side that acts as a trailhead into the Orange Trail, which is kind of in the woodlands here. Looking at the Perkiomen Trail, we do want to look at, this segment of the trail is on road along Deep Creek. We want to look at rerouting that through the woods so that kind of comes and separates from the road and then has kind of a very defined crossing here and continues on. We also want to look at how we start to connect people safely through places. So again, creating those defined pedestrian crosswalks, but then, giving walkways that kind of start to create small loops so people can kind of walk through. The grades through here are not steep, so we can start to create kind of ADA trails without a lot of grading to kind of allow people that might have mobility issues or sight issues to kind of navigate small walks throughout this area. Are looking at a minor kind of reconfiguration of the existing boat launch drop-off area, trying to pull the pavement back away from the water a little bit, create more of a vegetated buffer, as well as get a walkway that kind of comes in across to there. Develop an ADA boat launch, have a few ADA parking spots, and then some kayak rack storage here. Currently there's a cable down there. A lot of people don't want to store their kayaks on the ground. So just offering maybe 2 racks that people could rent if they wanted to store their kayaks at Deep Creek. And then looking at the existing picnic grove, just some minor improvements there, as well as kind of introducing a few areas for ADA picnic tables as well. And then the last thing along Deep Creek Road, we do have a crosswalk here, developing more of a tabled crosswalk, and then pairing that with 2 speed humps to kind of, again, help slow traffic down through that area. So this is, we'll talk about trails throughout all the concepts. We're really talking about different types of trails, right? We have opportunities for many types of trails within this park. The Perkiomen Trail kind of acts as your multi-use regional trail, stone dust. I think it's on average 12 feet wide throughout the park. There's opportunities for, just small pedestrian pathways. So this is where we're really focused on creating connections between different uses and allowing for those small little walks throughout the park. And then there might be opportunities where we just have mown trails, right? Or a hiking trail that might just be natural dirt surface, or in some areas where it might be a little wet, maybe we do a mulch trail. So throughout the plan, we'll kind of identify different types of trails and where some might be more appropriate than others. In terms of the visitor center, this is something we're still working with the architect on in terms of how big of a space is needed, what type of program amenities would you include in it. But I think the key idea is to think about, display areas. Do we pick up on environmental education, park history, having a place for a meeting room or a multi-purpose room that's open to the community, restrooms, park offices, and then also some storage facilities. So I think this will definitely expand as we move on. Some of these ideas were just kind of thrown out. I think a lot of the committee members kind of had good feelings about Hickory Run State Park. They've been there recently. This is a pretty new facility. Or it might be something that's a little more modest, like this environmental welcome center. I think everyone is probably familiar with roundabouts. I know there's some in the areas, but these are just kind of examples of a more rural, low-speed roundabout. So it's designed so that people move through at about 25 miles per hour. And then the idea of that raised crosswalk as well as kind of a speed hump. And there's different ways you can do speed humps so that, again, they're not slowing down first responder vehicles, or they allow for bike traffic as well. Looking at kind of the interior part of Deep Creek, coming off of the traffic circle, we kind of have a new alignment of the driveway coming in. And we're looking at kind of trying to spread out parking within this area. So that's not all centered in the back. So we kind of have a one-way parking, angled parking here where we're getting about 22 spaces. And then this comes into what we're developing kind of a new driveway that brings people back into the larger parking area, where again, we're looking at about just over 100 spaces in this area, with a large central island that would allow for trees to be planted up against the parking, allow for walkways to kind of bring people into the main use areas, as well as some stormwater infiltration that can kind of happen in the center of that parking area. With the realignment of the entrance drive coming in here, currently you have that driveway that comes in right next to the restrooms. We're looking at, relocating the playground, where we're looking at kind of like an inclusive playground. right next to the restrooms and pavilions, and having that roadway come in above that so that you start to separate that conflict with pedestrian and vehicular traffic. Maintaining existing restrooms and the existing pavilion, but just kind of enhancing some of the pathways through there so that we're eliminating steps. Everything kind of becomes an accessible grade. We're kind of building off of that central flagpole and kind of really letting that be the center of the space, and then have activities that kind of float around that center space. Maintaining the lodge area with some parking for the rangers, but letting all the area around that lodge be pedestrian oriented. Kind of same with the pavilion, you know, you still have that access drive for drop off, but you kind of have more pedestrian oriented areas around the pavilion. And then the idea here is like where the rangers would turn in to park at the lodge, you would then have a gate, and really looking at letting this still be a generous 12-foot wide path, but taking away the idea of a road there, right? So that this becomes a completely pedestrian zone in here. And like at number 5, maybe widening that out. So you kind of have what we call a promenade overlook of Deep Creek, and maybe during a festival, that's where you pull up a few food trucks, and that kind of becomes a big center of activity during a festival, and developing more of a picnic grove, ADA picnic grove, kind of off to the side of that as well. And then some minor things, you know, along the lake shore, really kind of trying to get away from mowing right up to the lake, but still recognizing we want to have some fishing access. So kind of boulders along the edge to really kind of reinforce that water edge and allow people to get right up to fish, but we don't have to mow right to the edge of the water, right? So really kind of creating that meadow edge and expanding some of our meadow areas, as you're seeing in yellow here. So this is examples of inclusive playgrounds. I mean, these really function and look like regular playgrounds. There's just a lot of thought given to both caretakers and children and how they use the space so that it's accessible to people of all abilities. Looking at that promenade, so this is kind of the idea of, you know, fun site furnishings. We probably want to incorporate some sort of shade in there. And then, you know, picnic pavilions that maybe have a little more structure to them, but, you know, a nice stone dust base, tables where anyone can kind of pull up a chair to, or, you know, traditional benches as well. So really making sure we kind of think about all abilities as we're starting to design these places. Going to look at the north side, Green Lane Lake area. So we're going to kind of start along, we'll come in through the Perkiomen Trail. So currently, if you're on the Perkiomen Trail, you would come up, you would cross Deep Creek Road, and then you would kind of go south of Deep Creek and come back out and use the Deep Creek Road Green Lane Bridge to come up. So what we want to look at is the idea of kind of a bridge boardwalk that brings you over the creek and keeps you within the park so that you're not going along the road up here. So kind of coming into the park here, and then the trail would continue through as it does currently. Looking at the parking lot on the Green Lane area, again, working within the existing paving, but start to look at how we can get more trees in there, maybe an island. Let's get a little drop-off area so people can pull up, unpack all their picnic supplies, and then also kind of get all the ADA parking at the front near the pathway as well. So looking at kind of reconfiguring this, we come up with just under 110 spaces. And then, you know, you have your existing trail, just some minor changes in that would make that completely accessible all the way down to the Deep Creek side. Looking at kind of relocating the playground a little bit so it's closer to the pavilion, and really looking at kind of focusing this play area more on nature-based play, maybe some whimsical water play, not necessarily a spray pad, but maybe a hand pump where kids can kind of interact with water in a very safe way. And then also with the amphitheater, really kind of building upon what you have there, but just providing some pathways and kind of in that back of the amphitheater start to create more of a tree planting between that amphitheater lawn and the existing tree coverage as well. And looking at improving kind of the picnic grove areas as well, just to make sure that they're safe and accessible. With the parking, one of the things we wanted to make sure that, you know, during an event, this open lawn functions for overflow parking, looking at a way to maximize that during events. So kind of setting up what we're showing here is a stabilized turf parking area for about 40 cars. But it kind of sets the tone for how parking would happen across this field during an event so that people have a visual cue when they're setting up that first row across. And it's not up to the rangers to kind of be like, okay, how are we going to park people tonight? But that would allow for maximum parking in this field during festivals and events. So just looking at kind of that example of what that boardwalk might look over the neck of Deep Creek coming into the lake. It could definitely be wood, or we've often worked with kind of an open grate. Sometimes that's preferable in certain wetland situations. Nature-based play, so just, really looking at this can be a combination of natural materials such as boulders or logs, or something that's maybe a little more manufactured, but kind of fits in the realm of nature. This is a great little water play area with some chutes and canals that go through the rocks and some sand, so you can really start to manipulate the water as it moves through this area. The other thing we wanted to look at Green Lane, and this is something that, has been on the county's radar for a long time, is, we do have two bridges that are currently not in use in this area. We have the old Snyder Road Steel Bridge that comes out onto Gravel Pike, and then we have an old rail trestle bridge up here just south of the Perkiomen Trail. So looking at a way to kind of create the potential to have a loop trail through here. The main... Well, so there is, it's not easily done. Let's just say that. Because when you look at, Gravel Pike, which I think we're all familiar with, that road comes right up to the dam edge. There's not really a shoulder. This land you're seeing at number 2 is down in the floodplain where we wouldn't want to put anybody because it could be dangerous in a storm event. So really to kind of get a trail through here, we're looking at shifting the road into the hillside, right? So that you can get a side path on the park side. But once you get to number 3, you're at level land and you're in the park. A trail at this point is very feasible, getting you around and then using that rail trestle to get you across the Perkiomen Creek coming into Night Lake. So, this is a big idea, but I think it's an important idea that obviously people are excited about. Okay, so now we're kind of moving kind of northeast to what we call Deep Creek Barn. So this is along Deep Creek Road. You can see the edge of the lake here. We were just looking at that Perkiomen Trail. This is the existing Orange Trail area in the Deep Creek Woods. But when you get to the barn, you kind of come off of Deep Creek Road, you pass through some residents, and then there's some ag fields, and the red barn kind of sits right there, and that's all within the park area. So the parkland kind of comes up into this area, and you have a large area of park that kind of comes all the way over into these woods. So within the Deep Creek Barn, we definitely want to find a use for that barn. If buildings sit vacant too long, they often they go the way of all good buildings, right? So looking at, finding a use for that barn is kind of a key thing here. We really see this as a place where there could be educational opportunities. And then we also want to make sure we kind of tie it into the greater park, right? So one of the things is just parking. The barn is located right on a curve. That driveway isn't really safe for public access. So developing kind of a new, just a very trailhead type parking lot with maybe 10, 12 spaces on the straightaway of Deep Creek Road, and then having a pedestrian crossing paired with that parking lot. And then looking at, we've met with the farmer to the northwest here. And, he does currently farm these fields. I think he uses them for hay, but really working with them to maybe kind of look at grazing of animals and warm season grass, like native warm season grasslands. It's something that Mike McGraw, who is our scientist, biologist, has done a lot of research on the benefits for both the cattle as well as bird habitat. So we really see this as a place to kind of showcase that type of collaboration between habitat restoration and farmers. So we kind of see these each being kind of individual paddocks where, cattle would be kind of rotated through them. And it might be small cattle, it might be pig. I think he farms pigs and cows in this area. But then having kind of a trail that would go around that would be kind of an ADA trail through that area. But then going to hiking trails using the existing Fisher's Lane Bridge to kind of get you to the other side as well. And so when we look at kind of those trail connections and how we tie back into our Deep Creek area, so this is kind of coming up the hillside. We do open up onto an ag field, and this is an area where we would require a trail easement to kind of span that missing gap of parkland. But then it brings you back down into the parkland. You kind of cross over the pipeline easement that people might be familiar with. And then you're back at that crossing of the Perkiomen Trail. So you kind of come back into the park that way. Or obviously through the Orange Trail, you have a connection where we'd kind of propose a new trail at one. That would be a more direct route, and then maybe a secondary route that takes you down along kind of the creek stream side there, which is a tributary to Deep Creek. Moving up to the lower reservoir of Green Lane Reservoir, we're going to look at two areas. One is the Hemlock Point area, and then the Hill Road recreation access area. So with Hemlock Point, there's a lot of great things going here. Traditionally, this was the home of the Nature Center. You still have your regional park offices back here where we do have the Nature Education Nature Center offices are located there, as well as your regional ranger offices. So this is tucked behind Marlboro Elementary School. The formal entrance is to the north of the school. So we really want to make sure we're identifying that as a park entrance. Right now, it doesn't really read as a park entrance when you're driving down the road. And then when you go back here, like obviously this was a former camp area. There's a lot of relic infrastructure back in this area. There is an existing parking lot, but it really isn't a formal parking lot. So we want to kind of improve that parking lot there, work within the existing impervious, but kind of formalize that parking lot. Look at the potential to have a bathroom, restroom back in that area. It might be similar to what you have at Green Lane in terms of those composting toilets, or we might have the potential to tie into septic in this area as well. Look at some basic kind of accessible trails that would kind of connect you between key areas as well as back up to the elementary school. But then at number 6, kind of looking at the idea of having this little pavilion that you kind of maybe you go through. This is a very young kind of successional forest. We like to call it teenage forest. It's something in Pennsylvania that we don't have a lot of. We either have farm fields that have kind of become old fields, or we have mature hardwoods. But teenage forest is a key habitat community for birds, a lot of kind of smaller sized mammals. So we do have a really great start of that down here. We want to enhance that. And so the idea is, bring school students kind of through that, and then all of a sudden they kind of come into this little secret meadow with a pavilion there. So starting to set up the bones again for outdoor nature through here, working with the existing trail system, maybe kind of developing more of an overlook at the point there. But between kind of the park offices and the pavilion, kind of having a start and a restroom of bringing students back to this area. I think one of the great ideas that came up either at the first public meeting or the committee meeting was that maybe there's also the opportunity for self-guided education through here. There's really great habitat in here. We don't want to really propose any new trails. We'll definitely get to questions at the end, sorry. Looking at the Hill Road area, this area functions pretty well. I mean, we do have a lot of numbers on here because we're just kind of labeling some of the existing stuff. But I think the key things we really want to look at here is one with the access drive, just making sure again that wherever we're crossing trails across the road, we have clear marking for those crosswalks. If we think speeding is a problem, maybe we're elevating that and creating a raised table for those crossings. But also just making sure that the blue trail kind of connects through this area. Right now, it kind of delivers you to one end of the parking lot and you kind of walk through the parking lot, come out the other end. We want to make sure that we're really, routing people around parking lots and through parking lots. Maybe providing a little bit of an access area at number 4, where you kind of maybe have some picnic tables and an overlook. Things that you can do while maybe you're done boating, but you're not quite ready to leave the park, right? So looking at a few just basic amenities in this area. And then as we go off to the blue trail, this is kind of the first stream crossing. I think this is a culvert crossing. Some of these areas we might want to look at. Do we want bridges in some of these? No, so there's a lot of maintenance issues with that culvert. So we do want to kind of look at those crossings and understand what's the best thing we can do environmentally to make sure that those crossings are stabilized and that people can get across them safely. Okay. Going up to the very top end of the reservoir, we're going to start at the Walt Day use area. So just to kind of orient you, we have Layfield Road, 663. comes across the reservoir, and then we have Montgomery Ave with Upper Perkiomen Middle School, and then the high school. Walt Road kind of brings you back into the park area formal. So looking at kind of starting off, and we're kind of jumping the gun here. So we do recommend things within the bird sanctuary on the north side of Layfield Road. So that's where you're kind of seeing maybe a trailhead parking area. But connecting those two areas together with a trail system. So looking at a rapid flashing beacon, and we'll show you an example of one of those at Layfield Road here to get people safely across the road. And I'm kind of developing a trail system through the edge of these inlets. Need a little crossing of a little stream here. And then we've talked with Upper Montgomery Joint Authority. We're showing kind of maybe a mown trail going across the back of their area. They also are open to the idea that maybe it comes across the front. There's they're a willing partner to kind of allow that connection to happen across their property. As we kind of move on, this is kind of just an example, rapid flashing beacons for a low volume road might be more pedestrian scale. They definitely can get larger in a high speed situation as well, where you might see a mass arm across the road to really get people's attentions. Often they're paired with kind of a curb bump out. So that's what you're kind of seeing here or here, so that you kind of shorten the distance that the pedestrians have to walk across. So again, this was that joint authority area, bringing people in back behind the schools and really kind of connecting that. And we really see this as a hiking trail, pairing it with some restoration. So again, kind of getting some forest up against the lake edge there, and then meadow habitat. We don't see a lot of mowing or open lawn areas back here, but making sure we're kind of creating those connections. We do have a little easement that brings us up to Montgomery Ave that is within the park's ownership, but then there also might be connections we want to make to the schools as well. As we get to Walt Road coming in, really want to look at kind of having a pedestrian trail that brings you in from the road as well, right? We're right at the back of those school fields. You have a trail that kind of comes down to this point and then ends. So kind of connecting that, bring pedestrian trails in. Again, this was coming from our lakeside trail. We have some wetland area where we might need some boardwalk, bring people down. And then again, have that trail kind of connect all the way through. This is the boat storage area. We have an existing trail at 2 with some minor improvements that could be an accessible trail that kind of brings you through that woodland area. So we really, there's not a lot of improvements that we want to pose in this area. We just want to make sure that we're connecting people and with pedestrian access and not expecting people to kind of walk along driveways or through parking lots. As we look at the south area, so again, we were just kind of up here where we have the main storage area. As you get back into the south area, it's mostly small crafts. So you have kayaks, canoes, and then kind of small fishing boats back in that area. So they're currently stored within 3 bays, looking at creative ways to kind of maybe have racks that store 6 kayaks up, maybe having bigger racks where a family of 3 kind of has a space where they can put 3 kayaks in, and then also maintaining some of the existing racks for the fishing boats. So you kind of have, a variety of storage solutions, but with that kind of maintaining, if not the same level of storage, more storage just within the back area at number 6. But what that does is that opens up those 2 bays in the front area for parking, right? One of the things we've talked with a lot at the community level, and I think came out maybe in the public meeting, is more kind of picnic opportunities within the park. We see this as a great place where you could have kind of 2 pavilions that someone could rent, have a family gathering there on a Saturday or Sunday, and kind of get to a different part of the park, right? Not everything has to happen at Green Lake Park. So we see this as an opportunity to kind of fit that in this area, build upon what the Perkiomen Waterside Conservancy has here. Look at, again, the opportunity for maybe 2 restrooms in this area. And then at number 5, formalizing, we kind of have 2 boat launches currently back in this area, but maybe focusing one at 5 and having it be, again, an ADA kayak launch. We also were looking at kind of some angled parking here at 7. And then this kind of becomes an ADA loop through here, where we would have some ADA fishing piers back at number 9. So this is kind of looking at, those different storage solutions. This is kind of that example of those family racks where you can get multiple within a space, or, the 6 up racks. Looking at an ADA fishing pier, the key with that is the railing, so that you kind of have a lower opening for someone if they're in a wheelchair. And then looking at those accessible kayak launches, kind of two different product images here. So there's a range of variety that you can go with. And then last is kind of looking at trails in this area. You know, there's a lot of trails back here. If you haven't had the opportunity to walk them, I would encourage you to get out there. It can be a little confusing because they're not blazed. You kind of have to pay attention to where you're going. But there's a great primitive fishing trail that kind of hugs the lake edge. And there's all these little inlets that you kind of come in and out of where you see different waterfowl out on the water, a lot of great little wetland habitats. And then there's the main kind of former road that comes through here. There's little trail offshoots that connect up to the high school fields. And then this one really isn't a trail per se, but it's not, I'm sorry, down here. There's kind of an old, it's almost like a fire break between a cedar forest that brings you back up to 7th Street and Butternut. So really looking at how we connect into kind of those borough roads and kind of give opportunities for people to walk into the park without having to drive and get in their cars. So again, you know, we talked about lakeside fishing. This is an example of kind of that boulder edge that gives people the opportunity to get right up to the edge of the lake. You know, this is an example along that reservoir where, you know, a lot of people are walking up to the lake edge and you can see that erosion taking place. This is one of those existing little primitive fishing trails. It goes through some pretty wet area. That might be where, you know, something just a very primitive boardwalk through a seasonally wet spring gives people the ability to still get back there without damaging any habitat. Last, we're going to look at the bird sanctuary and fly fishing area. So again, to orient everybody, so this is Layfield Road, 663, kind of crosses the reservoir. So everything above that is closed to boat traffic. And this is the formal waterfowl sanctuary. And then you have Church Road that kind of runs north of that. Wetlands where kind of Perkiomen Creek comes in. So this is kind of the fly fishing area up here on the Perkiomen Creek where they just did the dam removal. And then these are kind of all the park open fields. Some of them have had restoration done, but a lot of them you can see the shadows of the aerial underneath where you see all these hedgerows that historically kind of divide those fields up into different little spaces. So one of the big kind of ideas here is to break up those hedgerows and really start to create large meadow areas. So, you know, we call this core habitat area. So for potential nesting to take place, you have to have kind of core habitat that isn't broken up by trees or trails. So really looking to kind of just, again, maybe we have a trailhead parking lot at Kutztown Road and Church Road. And then that kind of just has a mown trail connection that would bring you up into the main kind of area. So you would cross Molasses Creek at 3 and come back down along Hawk Road. Didn't say that right. So again, just looking at examples of that grassland bird habitat. So low meadow areas with a mown trail through is kind of what we're thinking of this area. Maybe we have some hot spots of just fun, you know, summer color, fall color with our blooming perennials. So again, we came down along the road, we'd have a crossing at the intersection here. And then again, maybe a larger parking lot where we do have a very popular resource currently with the birding community at the waterfowl. But kind of really encouraging people to park on the other side of the road. And then again, having another rapid flashing beacon to bring them across Church Road at a formalized drop-off area. From the parking lot, really looking at kind of bringing people up into this area. This is the high point of the field. So having a little platform up there, maybe it's an earthen overlook, and we'll kind of show pictures of that. That allows for views back out across the fields and down towards the reservoir itself. But again, you can see where we're removing all these hedgerows to kind of really open up this meadow space. And we do see this as, you know, there is a lot of grade. You come up pretty high, but we do feel like we could provide this as an accessible trail that kind of gets people up to that spot and back down. As we go down across Church Road, sorry, I keep forgetting we have images in here. So, you know, this is kind of an earthen overlook. Some are more traditional where they're just raised like this. So kind of looking at kind of melding those two. As we get closer to the water's edge, just having an open platform where people can kind of get out and safely set up cameras or tripods, looking out towards the water. And then there might be some areas where we actually want to look at kind of formal blinds for wildlife. And, you know, these can be done very artistically But, still maintaining open views so that they don't become hiding places. So as we get south of Church Road, we do have some trails that kind of bring you probably back down into this area. We're looking at, again, trying to connect both to the fly fishing area as well as the Walt Road day use, kind of continuing that trail system. Looking at a primitive crossing of the Perkiomen Creek here. And then again, another pedestrian crossing would bring you back up into the fly fishing area. Looking to kind of formalize that parking lot a little bit. Look for an opportunity to maybe have a little picnic table there for people to kind of sit and orient themselves as they're, about to head off on a hike or finished fishing. And then as well as kind of continuing some of the informal trails that, the fly fishermen have established kind of coming down. So this is that idea of that primitive crossing. This was the day I was out there, there was a dad with, it looked like a grandfather and their 3 kids, out finding crawfish in the creek, right? So the dam was removed and we already have habitat moving back into the stream. So they were having a lot of fun out there. But again, bringing people down through this trail system, you do have to kind of bring them back up a slope, but then you have the potential for all these overlook and kind of birding opportunities back across the reservoir up in this area. And that brings us back to that little trailhead parking area at Lakefield Road that we had identified earlier. So, one thing that we try to look at as we look at all these areas is how we connect back into those municipalities. So, with the fly fishing area, there's definitely the potential to have a trail along that stream that would connect up into the Upper Hanover Park system. Looking at the different boroughs, obviously we have ways where we can very simply connect into that borough sidewalk system for both Pittsburgh and Red Hill. Marlboro, really a little more difficult, but looking at that connection to the elementary school is a key primary connection that can be built on in the future. And then also looking at how we kind of look at Green Lane, they've done trail planning and kind of look at how we can better strengthen those connections between the park and Green Lane borough. These are all kind of on our radars moving forward. So I'm going to quickly go through the next steps and then we'll kind of open up to discussion. All of this should be on your handout. Definitely, we just encourage you, get the word out. Our next public meeting will be December 6th. That's going to be the draft plan presentation. So we'll take all the input from tonight, from our focus group meetings, as well as kind of emails and committee members, and kind of start to formulate the draft plan. So a lot's going to change between now and then. If you haven't taken the survey, this is on your handout. These links, you can just use the QR code with your phone and it'll take you right to the survey or to the wiki map. Also, if you're out in the park a lot and you enjoy walking around and just looking for fun things, I encourage you to download iNaturalist or eBird and really get involved in helping catalog what's in the park. Both of these have very active sites within Green Lane Park that you can contribute to and help us understand what you're seeing in the park. With that, we'll open up to discussion.
We also have, thanks Sarah for going, there's a lot of information. We'll entertain questions. We have a second mic that I would ask Josh to help pass around. And I just ask everybody to keep your comments like to a couple minutes. Not going to be able to cover everything tonight. And this will all be up on the website next week. So we'd encourage you, I know you're going to have lots of detailed comments, to send us an email on the presentation. Go ahead, you're first.
Hi, my name is Heidi. I live in Green Lane in Marlboro Township, and I also represent Montgomery Runners, Monco Runners. We have 1,000 runners. We're based in Green Lane. We use the park all the time. I love the improvements that you have near the Orange Trail, the roundabout, the speed bumps, all of the flashing pedestrian signs up in the north end of the park. My question is for Green Lane Borough. We start all of our runs. We do this at least once a week, and we run from Green Lane Borough to the trails. It is a nightmare. People have almost been hit by cars. People have been on bike, fallen off their bike on the sidewalk, and broken bones. Do you have similar plans in these awesome ideas that you have to connect Green Lane Borough?
Yeah, the trail up around the gravel trail that takes us over the old railroad trestle, I
Yeah.
believe takes us up to one of your planned connections. And we thought that was the best direct connection to get into the borough. We know there, you could come down sooner, but there's a lot of water to get across. So our thought was, the gravel trail the gravel trail that we proposed it's also a very good project to get funded through some of the state and federal programs. Because the biggest lift there is to move that roadway into the hillside a little bit to create enough room. So we thought that was the best connection that we could come up with and the most realistic one. If you have other suggestions, we'd love to hear them. You gotta speak into the mic.
Yeah.
No, but we're trying to let people at home hear too. Your best friend just used it. Come on.
How would you, I don't understand where this entry that you're talking about is going into Great
Yeah,
Lake.
let me get back to it. I'll try to, but,
They're below.
Because that 29 bridge is dangerous. The sidewalk is narrow. It's not up to code. The sidewalks are, they have the signs in the middle of the sidewalk.
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. So I was really hoping that the county was going to address that
which bridge? The
on
gravel-
29, the bridge
Yeah.
that goes
That-
across from the gas station to the, yeah.
Okay.
So there's an existing trail. Yeah, it's where the road.
So I think, there's, like, this makes a key connection, but I get what you're saying in terms of, the borough you have, like, if you were, can you continue on the Fort Campbell Trail, then there's this spur that comes out to the borough.
Yeah.
They definitely have looked at plans, and so this is outside of the park project, so it's kind of hard for us to look at recommendations there, where they want to look at bringing the connection behind the gas station and all that. So that's kind of the borough's plans, and then it would drop you down to, I believe, Walnut Street, that would be a regional trail that would go out to the east. So that's kind of within the borough planning. So we'll start to kind of represent that on within the draft plan, but it's kind of outside of the realms of our recommendation.
Also, it's a very good project for the borough to try to get funded through the county's program. They have a funding program through DCNR, Conservation of Natural Resources. So as Sarah mentioned, not everything can be done within it's not within the county park. We're trying to get this trail up to that area.
But you're working
So,
on Pittsburgh, Red Hill, but you're not.
again, I'd suggest you talk to Borough Council. There's some projects that the county can do and some that local government has to do as partnerships. And the county can help provide money. If Green Lane Borough applies to the county for money, there is money available for projects like that. Right?
Hi, I'm Donna. My question is about next steps and the overall purpose. So you presented a whole bunch of amazing ideas. Is the draft plan going to be more like a prioritized thing? And then how do you envision that the county uses what is come up with here? And how will they decide like what to do first and what?
Yeah, good question. The draft will have priorities. And I'll tell you already, the priorities are going to be the first things that Sarah went over they'll be among the priorities, the management units. We want to treat stewardship like a capital improvement. We want to treat stewardship in this part like a set of swings and a little tot lot. It's for too long, stewardship is thought of as maintenance, right? And there's nothing, often it's not that exciting. But we want to make stewardship exciting. And these will be among the top priorities. In addition to that, there'll be other priorities for some of the physical improvements. We don't know what those are yet. We're going to work with the county staff and the committee to come up with a list. So to hopefully answer your question, the county's going to have a long shopping list with numbers attached to it. And it's at least a 10-year horizon to start implementing this stuff, probably longer. And the other thing, if you remember the list that I went over, is we want to plan long time. We want to plan for at least a 10-year cycle of projects and funding and stewardship. We don't want the stewardship to go in and then not have the resources. Because once you, let's say, take out invasives and put in a warm season grass meadow, the installation is the first step, and then it has to be maintained for a number of years until it really starts to take off. So thanks for that question. But yeah, priorities are important.
As far as the night road parking lot for equestrians, is there any, you didn't mention any of the parking there. Is that gonna expand? Because they've reduced it right now. And on a busy day, you can get in there and get boxed in and you can't get out again. They
Yeah.
planted trees where we have parked.
Good question. And yes, we do want to expand that. We're going to show that as we didn't show it tonight. The other group, bikers use it, but also the astronomers use it from like 10 o'clock at night till 4 in the morning. And they've made some recommendations to us. So we think we can accommodate everybody, but yes, we are going to suggest that get expanded. And again, that suggestion came from the equestrian group and also from some of the cyclists.
I noticed that there's a lot of emphasis on new trails, and I understand some of the locations, why they make sense. But it also looks like some of them are going into areas that are going to break up habitat, which of course is not good for wildlife. And also, every time you put a new trail in, you're opening up the area to invasives, which is not good. One example is you talked about possible trails along the coves at the back of the kayak area up at Walt Road. Now, if you have a lot of trails going along the shore there to see the waterfowl aren't going to be there because people take their up there. They walk, they take their dogs, they let their dogs go in the water. So how are you preserving sensitive areas to not have trails?
So I think you have a very valid point, and that is very correct. To be honest, with what we're showing the Walt Day use, those are all existing trails. None of those are new trails. So I think and it goes back to the slide where we show like the types of trails, right? So sorry, can you go to the next? One more. We just have it. So, this is the existing trail that goes along the lake side, and we're not saying to improve that trail at all. If anything, you might just add 2 boards that go through it. So it really is just for fishermen or for the most extreme person that's willing to be brushed by sedge on their feet, right? Or willing to get their shoes a little wet. We're not saying turn that into an 8-foot wide trail. So, but behind it, you have the existing 8-foot wide dirt trail that is very accessible. That's removed from the water, but you still get views down to the water as well from there. So I think with this, we're really focused on just making clear that maybe you're right. Maybe this trail should be taken offline and we shouldn't advertise it. But it is an existing trail that people are using. So kind of looking at formalizing that system that people understand they have the opportunity to walk back there.
And maybe that's the point, that there are some areas where they're kind of footpaths and occasionally people go back them. Maybe they should be closed.
Yeah, well, definitely. I think as we, one of the things that we still need to do is kind of, we've been talking with Mike and showing him the concepts. We still have to do that final melding of really taking his recommendations and melding them into, should that be a trail? And maybe that shouldn't. Like that might be, as we kind of go into the draft plan, look at those things together and then decide, maybe there should be a trail there. Maybe there should be a trail at a different area. So that will definitely be kind of some of the refinements you see moving forward into the draft plan.
One of your charts, you had those new trails going through private property. How do you go about and do that? And what's the process?
Yeah, and this is obviously an aspirational plan. Before that would happen, the county would have to work with whoever the property owner is and obtain an easement. It could be, sometimes those easements are granted for just because people want to cooperate. Sometimes they're purchased. So, I mean, those are the 2 main ways that would be done. The example I use is joint authority. We contacted them. We didn't know what their reaction would be. They were very open to the idea. They're sort of a semi-public land. But with private property owners, I mean, that discussion, that negotiation has to be very delicately done, sensitively done, and it may not happen. So again, that's, our job is to, as planners, what we do is suggest things for ground that we don't own. And then it may happen, it may not.
First of all, it was a very impressive talk that you gave, and the breadth of these improvements is amazing to think about. And granted, all of them may not happen, but I'm sure some will, and most of them ideas. One that I'd like to ask you about is, so you did a very comprehensive look at the office area at Deep Creek, with the roundabout at Deep Creek Road, or in Snyder Road at the main park entrance there, and rerouting the access into the main parking lot next to the office. The question I have has to do with the proposed visitor center, which would be in the square parking lot called Lost Corner. And my question really is, what's the scope of that? Was that what you visualized in those visitor center images? Because that would radically change that landscape right there. So, and the corollary to that question is, would you be removing woodland there, or would that all just in the existing footprint of the parking lot?
Yeah, good question. Our architect is just starting to work on a concept sketch for this. One of the things we have to bounce off our county clients before he does sketches is a square footage. We're thinking 3,000 to 5,000 square feet, not a very big building, okay? In that range, which is, in that world, that's a smallish building. The building would be in the existing parking lot at the edge, because we want to be able to back up to the woodlands. And the other, you could say this is good or bad, is one of the early suggestions we got from one of our committee members was, there's no gateway to the park. You don't know you're arriving. So with some kind of signage on the road there as you're approaching, and also with the building, it lets you know you arrive. One of the things, the visitor center would have many functions. It could serve as a community meeting space for meetings like this. It would be educational. There might be an office in there so that, it can be easily manned. So that's as far as the details go at this point. It's an educational facility. Perkiomen Watershed Conservancy could use it. School groups could use it, et cetera. So, it would change a building there would change the view. We hope for the better if it's a nicely designed building, but all that's to be determined. I think.
I mean, that would, for my personal taste, that would be among all the ideas up there, the one that I would potentially have the most reservations about. Unless it was potentially much smaller, or like a kiosk or something less radically changing that landscape in that exact area.
Yeah, it's probably, of all the things we presented, one that's, as they said, at least a decade away would be my guess.
And then I have a comment that's be short. I think most, if not all, people in this room would probably sign on to the idea that there's a very low cost, low material intensive, low labor intensive improvement that can happen in many places in the park, which is not so much trail maintenance, but trail improvement, because there are so many stretches of these trails, whether it's orange, red, blue, all of them, that are perennially muddy. And there are good solutions that you see all over when we hike the Appalachian Trail, when you're hiking in New England, White Mountains. There are great solutions with bollards and boardwalks and short bridges that aren't that tricky to make, so I think many people, if not everybody in this room, would sign off on those as being really worth the cost.
Yeah, agreed. We just didn't really get to those tonight, but we agree. And again, it's about having the adequate resources to do that work in a systematic way.
Thank you.
Josh, you got somebody up here.
Hi, thank you. I'm Jan Rush from the Delaware Valley Amateur Astronomers, and thanks for
acknowledging our nighttime use of the park, which I bet a lot of people in this room are probably unaware of.
The state police, know, I asked them, I said, you see that?
Right, so this is a very special place. It has in this area some of the darkest skies around, and we love to come here at night. Just if I could make the plea, which I know you've heard before, that any of them, and in any of these improvements, that new lighting be taken into account, the preservation of the dark skies, and that means a lot of things like the type of fixture and where, how it's aimed and how it's timed to go off. Because even though you're talking about areas that can be pretty far from where we currently observe the skies, the light in the whole park will bounce off water molecules and basically light up the whole park. So if any of these improvements mean, new lighting, I'm sure they do. Just to emphasize, we take that into account, and there's information that's available about how to safely light an area and keep the light from interfering with the dark skies. And just one other thing, we're the Delaware Valley Amateur Astronomers. Most of our members are in Montgomery County,
Okay.
actually.
Okay. Well, you don't want to be you want to be inclusive. And certainly, I mentioned looking at also or suggesting to the surrounding municipalities that their lighting ordinances conform to dark sky standards, which would be helpful. And certainly anything, there's not a lot, we're not thinking of a lot of lighting. Obviously, the visitor center would have lights, okay, but maybe they can be turned off at a certain time, but they should all conform to those standards.
Nice job tonight, by the way. I live very close to the park. Recently bought a kayak, and I can kayak in the smaller lakes. To kayak at the bigger lake, you have to quarantine and pay for it, which really limits usage of that, or rent. I recently went up to Lake Nakamix, and you can kayak in that very big lake for free without quarantining. Wondering if that rule is being considered for change.
Yeah, it's not, it's really driven by Aqua because of and I'll get the term up.
Zebra mussel.
The zebra mussel infestations that can happen if you don't quarantine. So we're not considering for change. It's really a condition of Aqua to protect their water resource. So it's, it's an inconvenience, but we think, again, our focus is how do we protect the resource?
Thank you. My name is Richard Hull. I happen to have been a park ranger with Green Lane for approximately 30 years, including 2 years of what we called a park guard back in the early 70s. We spent a lot of time sort of keeping track of historic things, and I would just ask that the master plan be aware of the historic items, and there aren't a lot of them, but the Lenape Rock Shelter is precious, and we've purposely not had trails in that direction so it wouldn't be overrun and graffitied and so forth. There's a great deal of documentation by professional geologists who have uncovered a good deal of specimens from that area. Also, another one which is not as obvious, the Belgian rock that was used to line the walkways was cut by hand, which, think about that, there's an immense amount of blood, sweat, and tears probably to make that many of them, and a lot of them were created by, so happens, one of our only early Black families in Green Lane. So many of them have been disposed of for God only knows what reason, but the remaining ones should be preserved, and if not, some which can be salvaged. Just, that's my input with regards. I would imagine there was also a lot of Lenape history in the area, and they were prominent in the area and deserve recognition because we borrowed their land.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that.
Bob Bowman, I got here a little bit late. I'm not sure whether you covered Knight Road, but very concerned about restoration or our Born Cemetery along Knight Road. Has anything been mentioned on that?
We didn't mention it tonight, and really, I think we know you've had long discussions over a long period of time with the county, and you know, probably best to pick up that conversation with the county.
In your planning, you have nothing at the moment.
Yeah, I know there's a historic marker in the park about the former cemetery. I guess the other thing is we're not quite sure what you're asking for. So that would be helpful to know. Maybe, it's probably more complex than you can explain tonight, but we really don't know what you're asking for, so.
Yeah, well, I think we covered that completely with the county before. It's been 20 some years. Been going.
Okay.
The fault solicitor, I guess, of the county.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else? Anyone else? Comment, question, suggestion?
I will say there've been a lot of great ideas tonight. Personally, I'd like to see the park tied together. Crossing 663 there is an awful idea. That is, it's a high-speed area, and a crosswalk is only gonna give a false sense of security out there. It really is. That's a terrible spot to cross.
I don't disagree with you. We just want to keep the big ideas in, but you're right. There's a lot of high-speed traffic through there.
Yeah, and if there is a crossing, rapid flashing beacon can work. But it has to meet PennDOT standards. Yeah, so we could talk about that all night. Other comments, suggestions? I think it's important too, if you have the time and interest when this is up online, what would really be helpful to us, if you have the time, is to go online, see what you like, tell us what you like. More importantly, tell us what you don't like, write us an email. That's really great. Also, if you ever want to call us, we'll always return the call and we can have a conversation.
Hello, my name is Lou. I'm also with the DBA, but I have a different question. So along the Red Trail, among all the trails you have, the Red Trail is probably the easiest one to traverse. Except for one area that caught me by surprise. As you're leaving the Red Trail parking lot, going behind the mobile homes down, I guess behind the school there, all the trails, they all converge where that bridge is. It's very, very steep. And I wasn't expecting that on my bicycle.
So why you have the wrist thing?
I mean, there's boulders the size of watermelons and roots that stick out. I mean, maybe some signage, because that trail is, everywhere else, it's very mild and it's very, I don't know if you can divert it to get down that hill another way.
Okay, we'll look at it. Thanks for.
Yeah.
Just get.
Joe, you have a lot of actions there?
Not that I'm aware of, but we are working on a plan for, you're talking, and depending on which, if you were actually on the red trail, when you do come down that slope, we are working on fixing that.
Unofficial red, it's the one.
Well, unofficial red.
Middle, I know
Correct.
exactly what
Yeah,
you're talking
that's unofficial red. But yes, we actually have some plans there, because it's actually a maintenance.
It's dangerous.
Well, you're not supposed to be on. You know, but we are working on fixing that because our maintenance department does use it to access other parts of the red trail. So it's in the works.
Great. Thanks, Joe.
Maybe redirect it a little bit.
Can you explain what this wiki map does and the kinds of things we can do with it?
Sure. It's, first of all, it's easy to use, so don't be intimidated by it. I can use it. If I can use it, everyone can use it. And you can go on and you can draw a line or put a point on and make a comment. You can upload a photograph if you want to show us a condition. I think those are the major things that you can do. So it's very intuitive, very easy to use. It's not complicated. Probably you figure it out in 5 minutes. So those are the things you can use it for, adding comments, photos, drawing something on there. Okay. Well, again, thank you all for taking the time to come out on a beautiful night. You gave up a nice night, maybe in your backyard. We really appreciate your time and we'll look forward to seeing you in December. And again, go online next week. This will be up there. Send us your comments. Have a nice rest of the week.